Just for today, everything's okay, everything's okay. Never comes again, another day like yesterday. Just for today, everything's okay.
Good morning, everybody. I am going to do a short podcast episode, which I don't usually do. They're usually 45 minutes to maybe an hour and a half. Sometimes they go across multiple episodes. And this one, I'm going to tease something out of a past episode that I did. I think it was called The Purpose of Consciousness on This Earth. But I talk a lot about suffering, I talk a lot about ethics, and I talk a lot about the treatment of other living beings. And because I'm always weaving in and out of these other subjects, and because most of the subjects I address are fairly broad in scope, weaving in a lot of different parts of life, sometimes I feel like there's something that's really cooking and congealing in my brain that I don't say very directly. And so I'm going to do a short podcast episode because this is something I've said before, but I'm going to do a podcast episode where I just say this very, very directly. I went back and I took a quote out of something I had said there, and this is something that Buddhist monks have said and that spiritual leaders have said before me. But I'm going to say it very clearly and then tell you just a little bit of the evidence for this. So here's the quote. All living things subjected to conditions in which their life is threatened or subjected to conditions in which life is no longer capable of thriving, all living beings suffer terribly. I'm going to say it again. All living things or beings, if you don't consider plants beings, you can call it things, whatever you want. All living things subjected to conditions in which their life is threatened or subjected to conditions in which life is no longer capable of thriving, all living things suffer terribly. Now, the reason I'm saying that is I sort of almost want to say there are, at this point, I think, a significant number of people who understand that this is true, who understand that the industrial production of meat inflicts terrible, really gross, very disturbing suffering on other living creatures. That we know now that even plants struggle to survive and will put out distress signals. And the fact that you don't understand it or you can't perceive it doesn't mean that they're not suffering. I think there are lots of people who know that. But we get into these two camps where on one hand, you have human beings who have lived a life where they've had to work hard to thrive and, you know, they've raised crops or they've hunted and they've done these things and they know it's not the best thing ever, but they're maintaining themselves and their children, and that feels good and that feels right. And they get sick of being told that they're a bad person. And so at some point, so we're talking about more of the right wing or the conservative, you know, in society, who at some point are like, you know what? You're all weak, whiny assholes. We know life is hard. And all you do is criticize people who make the world go around and have to hunt to provide food or raise crops. And you have all these opinions while you live off of what we produce. And you're full of crap. And I don't give a crap. I don't think animals suffer the way you say they do. I think you're just full of crap. You're a sensitive person who has learned to whine about everything. And you want everyone to be as miserable as you. So you want us all to feel bad about life and taking care of ourselves, and we think it's our God-given right, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe I am not framing their argument, but that is actually the culture I grew up in and is still my culture. And then on the other side, the other extreme are people who have some sense, like they perceive that animals suffer. It's not confusing. And then they can extrapolate from that and go, well, plants also suffer. And then you get the people who are tree huggers who are like, oh my God, they're sobbing because you chopped down a tree, whatever. I'm also part of that. All living beings do suffer when they're attempting to strive and they're attempting to live. If you thwart them and or put them in conditions where it's extremely difficult to thrive and express as the kind of life they are, they suffer. And sometimes they suffer terribly, and then sometimes they die of that. But that other extreme, they'll go there, but then they'll start believing that people who don't notice the suffering or don't believe that there is suffering are horrible, terrible people, and they should die, and we'd be better off without them, and they're evil, and blah, blah, right? And so then that extreme starts doing that. And then they start trying to inflict suffering and misery, and they start trying to stifle the people who don't notice or who aren't as tuned into suffering. And so you get these two extremes. In my opinion, neither one is accurate and neither one is grounded in what's true. I was never the ultra liberal who was just like angry at how evil people were. I didn't feel like people were evil. Just since I was a little kid, I could see that things suffer. And I knew that people lied about it. In one experience I had, there was a professional who was in a professional authoritative position who advised me in a certain surgical procedure with animals that because they were babies, they didn't really feel what was happening. That's why it was not necessary to use anesthesia. So I know that's bullshit, right? I was whatever age, I was young, a teen. I know that's bullshit. That's self-serving bullshit. It's like, oh, babies don't feel pain when they're cut or hurt. Like, stop. That's silly. Right? But it wasn't from some overly outraged. I just felt very, very deeply that inflicting suffering was wrong and lying about it to be self-serving because it's convenient for me or because it works for me is immoral. It's wrong. And I don't like it. I don't like it when I inflict suffering, especially willfully or needlessly. It's sort of scientific for me. It's like, oh, it would be best, you can say, oh, dogs are primitive or crabs are primitive or whatever, they don't experience pain the way we do, but you put them in a situation where they're struggling to maintain life or they're struggling to thrive and to express the way a crab expresses or the way a dog expresses, and you see all of these agitated behaviors that look exactly the same way a human acts if you set them on fire or if you rip their fingernails off or blah, 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 right? Let's say you rip the shell off of a crab. There's probably something similar to tearing your fingernail off. It's probably extremely painful, maybe excruciating. You drop a lobster into boiling water. I don't think there's a significant difference in the qualitative experience of that lobster versus dropping a human in there. If the human doesn't know they're being dropped in, if they're not experiencing psychological pain and suffering from that, there's probably no significant qualitative difference. Humans have a reptilian brain and a mammalian brain, which is the midbrain, the emotional brain. And then we have the cerebral cortex, which is what the outer part, the executive part, which is what makes us so much more clever than other animals. Scientifically, it's self-serving and it's silly. I know that there are scientific people who are like, well, you can't anthropomorphize, you can't, but it's like, shut up. That's just some stupid shit. You're not being scientific. You are, in fact, being anti the evidence. If you look at how a human acts when you drop them in boiling water and how a lobster acts when you drop them in boiling water, it's pretty obvious that you can assume that they're having qualitatively the same experience. Their bodies do the same thing. They act the same. And if you dip just one claw in it and pull them out, and dipped a human's arm in it and pulled them out so that now they have anticipatory fear and terror over what's going to happen to them. And now you bring the lobster near the pot. You're going to sit there and go, well, with the lobster, it's just a autonomic reaction. And, they're shut up. That's just some stupid shit. Right. So I've been through these. I don't need to rehash them. And I am going to keep this one short. I'm going to keep it under 30 minutes, maybe under 20, just to do a short podcast, a short episode. I think there are enough of us now that aren't like the woo-woo left who just use compassion as an excuse to hate people who don't perceive what they perceive. It's like, yeah, not down with that. And then there's the extreme right that likes inflicting pain because they know it pisses the left off and like upsets them. And there are images of extreme left-wing, sensitive people sobbing on the internet going, you're horrible. How could you do this? And the extreme right wing is like, yeah, ha ha ha. You're all idiots. I'm not down with either. It's simple. It's obvious. You shouldn't boil an animal alive. You shouldn't skin an animal. You shouldn't have a place where you drag hundreds of animals a day and summarily slaughter them, and they can smell the fear and the blood, and they're terrified, and sometimes it misfires and you have to cut their throat. Like whatever, like, this isn't good. This isn't good. We don't need the right wing or the left wing, right? So I'm just talking to right now, because clearly I'm condescending to and mocking those other sides, and they're going to listen to this and it'll be like, they're both going to think I'm an asshole, and maybe I am. I'm talking to the people who know that it's not woo-woo and it's not spirituality, and that you don't need to hate people who don't perceive it the same way and call them evil. They're horrible, evil, but like, you don't need to do that. It's time. It's okay just to stand up and go, this is just some stupid primitive bullshit. And we don't need to have an answer. So this is the other thing I've addressed before, is anytime you point out something that's a problem, there will be these people who imply that if you don't have the answer to the problem, that you're full of shit, it's not actually a problem. Well, that's stupid. Just because you don't have the answer doesn't mean that you can't go, oh, I see that this is a problem. I see that this is not a good thing. And if you can't start working on the problem, if all you're going to do is lie that it is a problem because you don't know what the answer is, that's silly as hell. Right? So you can have those conversations where you're like, well, because you get the right wingers who are like, oh, what's next? You're going to protect plants. Then what are you going to eat? No. I kill stuff. I eat stuff. Like, I'm not saying that there's a reasonable solution. I'm just not interested in pretending that what's blindingly obvious isn't true. I'm not interested in playing games, right? So if you're one of those people who's like, oh, so what do you think we're supposed to do? What are you supposed to do? Oh, you don't know? Oh, you're full of crap. No, that doesn't mean you're full of crap, you dumbass. Not having the solution doesn't mean that you don't see that there's an issue, that there's a problem that needs solving. Man, I'm in a judgmental mood. I'm really tired, really, really, really tired, and really emotionally worn down. So I'm going to publish it anyway, because this is me as a human. I can be incredibly judgmental and verbally caustic. It's not good. I'm not proud of it. And also, this is my podcast to just say what I have to say as a human. So it is what it is. But I'm also addressing, right, the human propensity to go, oh, if the solution is not within our control, or if we don't know what the solution is, we refuse to acknowledge that there's actually a problem. And so anyone who points out that there's a problem is full of crap, or they're just a whiny liberal. Okay. That's literally like, my daughter's 6 and she's already past that logic. So what I'm doing, like right now in this episode, I'm not talking to those extremes. I'm not talking to people who are going to double down on that stupid shit. I'm talking to those of you who may or may not come across this episode of this podcast, and who have thought the same things and who are frustrated in the same way, who know that what I'm saying is true. I'm not trying to convince you. Like, it's blindingly obvious. If you need convincing, you're just playing games with yourself, or else your perceptions are incredibly dulled. And I'm not interested in beating up on you or playing games or trying to blah, blah, blah. I'm talking to the people who are like, yeah, John, we know. We've already thought these things. We know. Or if it helps you to have clarity in the argument, right? Those arguments that people make where they're like, if you don't have the solution, then you're full of crap and you're just making up the problem. Well, that's dumb. You can recognize that there's a problem and not know what the solution is, or you can recognize that there's a problem and recognize that the solution is not within our capability. We could possibly eliminate industrial production of meat. We can't eliminate industrial production of plants, not with 7 or 8 billion people on the face of the planet. I don't know what the solution is, but I know as a logical, realistic, scientific person that it's a problem. That our close, intimate relationship to other living things has become so detached that we have no idea the destruction that we have wrought on the soil with monocropping, and with spraying in order to like be able to get rid of pests and blight and fungus and, the pesticides that we spray. Like, we can be pissed at Monsanto or like whatever the hell you want, but we can't produce all this food. Like, we're trying to go organic. We buy organic, but we're lucky that we can afford it, and it's freaking expensive. We can't just tell every impoverished nation and every impoverished family, you're an unethical, evil person if you don't buy organic. They can't afford that shit. Every once in a while, just because I have to, I'll wander into Erewhon. It's freaking criminal, man. You can spend like $8 or $9 for a quart of milk. It's insanity. And some people can afford that. God bless you. Good job. Good job. You figured out the aspect of financial. You figured out how to manage finances. And I hope you figure out how to manage the other aspects of your life. Congratulations. I love it. Good for you. Right? But we don't have a solution. We don't have a solution to the fact that if you read the book, The Hidden Life of Trees, it's an amazing exploration of how desperate the life of trees is. And just because they die over a period of 15 years or 20 years doesn't mean that it's not desperate and that they're not suffering and struggling and under constant assault from insects and small creatures and fungi and vines, and like they're struggling to live. And they communicate with one another through mycelium networks, etc. Like, all living things seek to thrive and seek to express their deepest nature. And when you thwart that surviving and that expression, they suffer. It's simple. You don't have to make it complicated just because it serves you to go, well, I want to eat bacon and I don't want to feel guilty. You do you, man. I'm not interested in lying about it. I'm talking to the people who already know that this is true. And I want to say one thing if nobody's ever said it to you. You have a right to start saying this. And when people accuse you of left wing, or if you're not left wing enough and they accuse you of being right wing, you have a right to be like, you know what? All of you guys shut the fuck up, because there are some reasonable people amongst us who have something to say. And that is, you can go woo woo about the environment and weep and wail about straws up, a turtle's nose, and then watch the left wing do things that are 10 times as destructive. And then you can have the right wing who don't give a shit and will inflict suffering, extreme right wing, inflict suffering in a heartbeat, and then make fun of the left wing because the left wing is actually genuinely trying to protect, like, all that bullshit. Fine, great. I respect certain things about any and all of that. But I'm talking to us in the middle. It's time for us in the middle, who are neither one of those things, to start to get up, to stand up and say, you know what, both of you guys shut the fuck up. Shut up. Recognizing that all life suffers when its basic way of surviving and thriving is stifled, and significantly stifled, and especially stifled to the point that it's going to die slowly, suffers terribly. And that's a fact. And you can see every sign of it. And anybody who talks shit is like, well, they don't, blah, blah, is full of shit. They're self-serving. You don't have to take them seriously anymore. You can make fun of them. Now, you probably shouldn't. It's against my spiritual, but right? I'm like really, really deeply in my human incarnation right now. This is my personality. This is my basic human John personality. You can laugh at them and just be like, you're an idiot. We're done with this shit. We're done with this conversation, right? Again, I'm talking to the people who already know that what I'm saying is true. All living things suffer. And if you think it's funny to limit the ability of a living being to thrive or to mess with its thriving, if you think that's funny or entertaining, you're an asshole. Or let me be more spiritual about it. You have a deep unconsciousness in relationship to this. There are probably other ways that you're brilliant and amazing. There are probably other ways that you have deep insights that I'm completely ignorant of, and I'm an asshole in that way. Right? But I guess I'm realizing that I'm done with those extremes, and I'm done with those conversations, and I'm done pretending that I don't know what I know. Right? Which is all living things suffer. And when you inflict extreme suffering with no awareness, right? Again, and I've bought meat from chain supermarkets. That's all suffering, man. You're dining on torture and suffering, period. It's not confusing. Some of those animals might not suffer. They might. But again, you look at all this stuff. If you drink milk, like dairy, it's like, how do you get that? Well, you have to get cows pregnant, and then you have to take their babies away so their babies don't drink the milk because the humans want to drink the milk. You think cows don't give a shit about their kids? That they don't suffer and get depressed, and over a lifetime of that happening to them, you don't think that it slowly breaks them down until they're depressed and miserable? Foie gras, you don't think that inflicts terrible suffering? I'm just not interested in bullshitting about it anymore. And, again, there are the people who will just come up to your face and be like, hey, dude, I don't care. I don't care. I don't care if I inflict suffering on animals. Okay, conversation done. I don't have an opinion about you. Whatever. If you end up caught in a lava slide and you're burnt to death, I probably will care because I'm just that kind of dipshit. But I'll try not to care. I'll just be like, fuck you. Okay, what happens to them happens to all of us. And it does. It does. It does happen to all of us. We are all going to die, and there's going to be significant suffering involved. And you have a problem with that when it happens to humans or it happens to you. Well, that's just a bunch of narcissistic, infantile bullshit. It's time for us to wake up and stop pretending. All life suffers, and we significantly participate in it. We willfully participate in it, and often gleefully participate in it. Zoos are bullshit. Yeah, there are some where they're nothing but rescue animals. For example, the Santa Barbara Children's Zoo is a beautiful place. They're all rescue animals. Great. Most zoos are not. Circuses that involve animals is just a torturous pile of bullshit. Everyone knows SeaWorld. It's just torturous bullshit. You're taking animals that roam thousands of square miles of free and open water and sticking them in essentially what for a human would be a large tub and going, live out the rest of your life in this. Yeah. You think that's okay? Do ya? Do ya? Yeah. There is I think, a growing and significant number of us that feel the way I feel. And maybe I think a lot of them are much kinder than me and less sarcastic and insulting. And I'm half proud of the fact that I'm sarcastic and insulting, and I'm half not. I struggle with it. Spiritually, I struggle with it a lot because it feels good and natural to me to do that, to say that. Yeah, really? You think that's smart? And I also spiritually believe that that's bullshit, that I'm only hurting myself. What am I going to do? I'm being very direct and honest with you guys today. So I'm talking to you, those of us who already know or suspect, and I'm saying it's time that we entitled ourselves to the commitment to what we know when these other extremes are totally committed to something they don't know and they're full of crap, and you know they're full of crap. Right? The left wing that starts with like, well, I'm compassionate. No, you're not. You hate everybody. Like nobody's good enough and you're judging everybody. Again, I'm talking about the extreme. And in the end, you don't really care because you inflict pain and suffering. You know, unless you're the strictest of vegans, like 90% of that community wears leather, you know, eats ice cream, dairy product, like, well, shut up. Like go to work in your own life and eliminate all of the suffering you inflict and then come teach us, how did you do it? Don't just sit there and have opinions and post on Facebook. Right? And then the right wing who are like angry little boys. Like I remember when I was a teen, you know, in a somewhat primitive society, it's like cool to say things that girls are like, oh my God, oh, gross. Oh, that's terrible. Where you could talk violent infliction of violence or, you know, whatever, and just show that you don't care, right? You're tough, right? So you get that in the extreme right wing, where they're literally like little boys who are like, ha, 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 ha. You know, they're like blowing up frogs with firecrackers to make the girls go, oh my God, oh, it's so terrible. How could you do that? But they feel proud of themselves. It's like, that's literally, they're getting attention from the left wing from that stupid shit. Okay, both of those people state with absolute 1,000% certainty that they know what they're talking about, and they don't. It's some silly ass bullshit. I'm talking to those of us in the middle who are not interested in inflicting that pain and suffering or being deluded that I participate in it. And I'm even worse because I know and have known my entire life what suffering was and how it was being inflicted on other living beings. I've brought up this many, many times, like during the golden age of talk shows, it became a thing to drag 10-year-olds, 13-year-olds onto TV who have like a horrible Munchausen syndrome by proxy, the emotional version mother who's like being a victim of their child, but actually they've done a horrible job and they're an abusive, negligent mother, and they drag them on a talk show, and then the talk show host comes on and tries to bully a 13-year-old because a 13-year-old's acting out. I knew back then, this is sick. These are the leaders of our human society, and they don't know better than to try to bully a child who's already neglected and abused by their parent. Okay, I knew that. I've known that. And yet I have participated in all of that. So I'm not saying be better than anyone. I'm saying it's time for us to stand up and to say as clearly as everyone else, when you stifle the ability of any living thing to thrive and express in the way that is natural for it, you inflict significant suffering. And if you cannot eliminate that, not knowing how to eliminate that or change that does not mean that we are not responsible. We have the ability to know that it's true and to respond to the truth of it. So don't let people pull that crap of like, oh, well, what are you going to do about it? I don't know. I'm just not interested in lying about what's being done by me and by everyone else. Because if we are going to come to some conclusion, and I do think that the human race has the technology, and if we applied it, we have the willpower and we have the capital here in the United States, and we have the genius. Like if we put our genius into this, we have the innovation and the creativity and the genius to begin solving these problems, but we can't because we're trapped between these two camps who only want to hate one another, and they leverage any little piece of truth they have, they leverage the fuck out of it until everybody hates that truth because those people have dirtied it by using it in these really gross, self-serving ways. So I want us in the middle to start going, we're done with you guys. Shut up. We want to say what's true, what we know is true. And this is what I know is true. All living things suffer and suffer terribly and often suffer terribly and die. And many go through years and years, even decades of terrible suffering so that the human race can use them, sometimes just for entertainment. Circuses, SeaWorld, many zoos, industrial production of meat. We're not interested in lying about it, even if we don't know what the answer is. We're not interested in letting these folks drown out our ability to say what we know, and that's what I know. That when you don't allow life to express and thrive in the way that is natural to it. And yes, I know the other thing that always pops up, right, is like, oh, well, nature's brutal. You haven't, yeah, I know. I was raised in nature. I know that animals often eat their young. A male will try to eliminate the offspring of other males. And I know that there are parasites that do terrible things to their hosts. And I know that day to day predators inflict terrible suffering. They'll take down a prey and they'll be eating out of their guts while it's still, yeah, I know all that shit. I'm not some kid in elementary school that's like, oh my God, what did they say? Right? But there are those people who literally think that they're going to shock you into silence, like, oh, I didn't know that. The fact that nature inflicts suffering doesn't mean that I am not responsive to the suffering and that I'm not interested in. See, your argument, that argument that those people make, is literally equivalent to someone saying, in the wild, feral cats will gang up on a cat and rape it. A female cat can get cornered and chased down by 2 or 3 cats. I saw this in Saudi Arabia where there were tons of wild, like not wild cats, but domestic cats that became wild. And it's crazy. There was a lot of suffering, like tons of baby little kittens. And I remember like going to throw something in a bin, and there was all these little feral kittens that literally leaped almost the height of the bin out of fear and reactivity. And one of them was missing an eye. Like, yeah, they're living in terrible suffering and misery, right? But if you think that makes it okay for you to consciously inflict suffering and misery, that's the same as me saying, oh, because wild cats will rape a female cat, it's okay for me to rape a cat. Yeah, that's a stupid argument. And it's time to start saying that's a stupid argument. All that means is you're equating yourself to a dumb animal. I'm not interested in participating in those stupid things anymore. I'm not interested in participating in the extreme right and the extreme left. I'm not interested in pretending that because I don't know the solution to a complex and difficult problem, that I shouldn't say that it's a problem when it's blindingly obvious that it's a problem. I'm not interested in pretending that because suffering happens in the natural order of things, that it's okay for me to inflict suffering as a conscious being. Not interested. Not interested. So I'm not talking to you guys. I'm talking to the people who already know what I'm saying is true. And if you haven't entitled yourself yet, if you haven't realized and knocked down those silly ass arguments, and if you haven't realized we're actually probably the majority in both the right and the left middle wing and the centrists, we're probably the majority who don't want to inflict suffering, want our kids to thrive, want animals, children to thrive, don't want to inflict suffering, or doing what they can, buy meat, but they may try to buy from a hunter because that was a far more humane way of bringing an animal down if you're going to eat meat. Like, they're looking for solutions. We're all looking for solutions. We're trying to push things forward. We're probably the majority. So it's time for us to start saying these sane, realistic things. And yes, when you say it, the people on the extreme right, when I say this, people on the extreme right are going to be like, oh, you moved down there to California and now you turn into some bleeding ass liberal. And because I'm not interested in hating the right wing, and I recognize the intelligence and the brilliance of most of the right wing, which I was raised in, by the way, I'm not interested in the people who are going to be like, well, you're secretly, a conservative. You're secretly, blah, blah, whatever. It's time for us to start whatevering these people. Whatever, man. You blow like hot air somewhere else. You have lost reason, and you've been lost to reason for a long time. I don't feel like having the conversation. There's no conversation to have, right? If you can't look at the obvious suffering in front of you and go, yeah, it's suffering. Okay, like, I don't need to throw a temper tantrum and sob on the internet, but it's fucking suffering, and I don't want it to be. And if I can mitigate it, I will. And if I can eliminate it, I will. And we're smart and we have resources, and there's no reason we can't start working on it. Well, you just want to argue and hate each other? Go ahead. Go ahead. I'm not with you. We're not with you. I'm talking to these people, which again is probably the majority. So we're knocking down those arguments, not engaging those arguments. We're saying what's true, which is they're stupid. They're childish logic. They're not logical or reasonable at all. The people who say those things may be reasonable, may be intelligent, but they haven't taken half a second to think through what they're saying. Right? Just like people who are like, well, what are you going to do about it? Well, it sounds like bullshit to me. Okay, you just basically low-key tried to make the argument that if I don't have the answer to the problem, that the problem doesn't exist. Well, that's, yeah, when you say it clearly, that's some dumb shit, right? So we should just start saying, yeah, we don't have to be mean, like I'm being mean. You don't have to be that. Just be like, yeah, your argument isn't worth engaging. There's nothing to say. And then to say it clearly, this is what you're saying. Because I don't know how to solve the problem, that I shouldn't be able to identify that there is a problem. Well, that's just some silliness. Not interested. So that's the message for today. And I said I was going to make it short, so I think at least hopefully it's under 40. I'm going to read the quote again that came from the past podcast. All living things subjected to conditions in which their life is threatened, or subjected to conditions in which life is no longer capable of thriving, all living beings suffer terribly. That's my quote. That's why I'm not attributing it. I'm not saying an author, right? From a previous podcast episode. I don't know how to solve it. That doesn't mean that I shouldn't say that it's true. And in the personal, I do know how to solve it. I do know how to go vegetarian and not inflict at least that level of suffering. I do know how to start raising a garden myself and trying to feed my family without having to pay into the system that does monocropping and sprays pesticides all over everything. In your personal life, you do know how to do it. It simply takes will and the knowledge that you do know how to do it, and that there are lots of people who know how to do it, and that it's worth doing, right? And there are people who know how to begin solving these problems. There are geniuses who know how to begin solving these problems on a large scale. We can solve these problems, not interested in pretending it's not a problem just because we don't know what the solution is right now. That's some infantile bullshit. Let's mitigate suffering and let's eliminate it when we can. Let's not pretend that it's not suffering, and let's state it clearly. And when people come with those silly arguments from either end, when these extremes jump in, be kind, be much kinder than I've been in this podcast. But start stating very clearly without getting upset and without your brain twisting because what they're saying is so silly. If it helps you, use the things that I've laid out and just state it clearly. We're not interested in participating in this anymore. It gets us nowhere. All right, you guys, that's it for today. That was my version of short. I love you guys. Have a great day. Talk to you next time.
Just for today, everything's okay, everything's okay.